Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today on this webinar with Woody Zuul. I'm personally very excited about this, and I know that people keep coming and joining this webinar there. That means that a lot of people are also interested, and this is resonating. So let's not make me talk too much. Maybe we should start. I am Ardita Karai. I'm one of the volunteers from the Toronto Agile community. And with me is also Peter Jakes and Paul Henman, two other volunteers that the three of us are the ones that put together and organize all the things behind the webinars that we do. In case you don't know, we do monthly webinars, and feel free to join us on all these webinars, subscribe to our newsletter, or follow us on our YouTube channel where we have the recordings. So a little bit about today. The usual introduction that I'm going to do. You all know that all you are on listening only mode because we are trying to avoid any noises around. And if you have any technical issue, just try to figure out maybe another browser or log on, log off. So see what how you can manage it to improve this quality of this webinar. I don't want to go any further without mentioning our sponsors. So you can see here all these great organizations that support us, not only for our conference, but even during the year for our events that we do. We have our open space coming up on April 21st, and you probably would be interested to join us and meet some of these sponsors that are going to be there as well. So let's get into this. Woody is one of those people that I have followed for many years on Twitter and on conferences, and is not just the, I don't admire just the knowledge that he brings, but I admire also how he speaks to us and how he brings all this knowledge in a very soft and nice, but you know, it makes you think way. And I always enjoy the conversations we have on the hallways of the conferences. And I always enjoy the support that you bring on Twitter with different conversations. Woody is mostly, probably the two big things are the no estimates and the mob programming, but overall he's a wonderful coach and has so much to bring to teams and to organizations. Right now he is at the Agile Games 2018 is going on, so I'm very happy that he made some time in between all the events going on through the conference to join us. Also, if you want to hear more from Woody, Agile Toronto, Agile TO Meetup is trying to organize something, and they want to bring Woody sometime during the year. So get in touch with Agile TO, and they might bring some more information about it. So without further ado, Woody, welcome.
Thank you. So first of all, I'm really honored by the things you said. I wish I could live up to that.
Oh, you do. You do. Nothing. There was no fake news there.
Oh, that's cruel, isn't it? Okay. So let's see. I need to hit this thing to show my screen, it looks like,
Yes.
and now my screen should be shown.
Yes,
All
we see
right.
your screen.
So hi everybody. I'm here to sort of give an advanced discussion about mob programming. So if you're not familiar with what mob programming is, I'll give a really quick introduction, but I want to get on to some of the thinking that I've been doing about why might this be such an effective way to work? Why are so many people starting to work this way, doing mob programming? Oh, it looks like I've got you. I've got the slide saying Lean Agile US February, so I apologize for that. So there's a good start. Okay, so I basically have been doing mob programming since about 2011 is when we started. So this is a culmination of 6 or so years of trying to figure out why is this working for us. The first thing I always feel I need to share is that this little quote from Peter Block that I never wish to tell other people what to do or whether they should do it, but just to share my experiences because that might be useful to them. So I in no way intend in this talk to tell you how you should believe or the work that you should be doing. This is just my way of sharing what we believe about the work we're doing. I'm going to give this really rapid introduction to mob programming for those of you who don't yet know what it is. So the basic idea is we're going to gather together all the people that we need with all the skills and knowledge that are needed to do the work that we're going to do. Instead of separating them into separate cubicles or whatever into different teams, they're all going to come together on one team. They're going to work together at the same time on the same thing, and this is how I like to say it. Mob programming is all the brilliant minds working together on the same thing at the same time in the same space and at the same computer. Now, I think those three things, same thing, same time, same space, are basically what Agile's about. I think the people who framed the Agile Manifesto noticed that when we separate people by the thing they're working on, there's not a lot of chance to collaborate. When we separate them by the time they're working on it, like somebody's writing requirements 3 months before somebody's writing the code, there's less chance for collaboration. And when we separate them by space, like they're in different buildings or in different cities or different countries, then they have less chance to collaborate. Mob programming just adds the idea of if we are bringing everybody together at the same time, working on the same thing in the same space, then they could potentially be sitting at the same computer. And when we started doing this, we noticed some great, what I would consider benefits, and that's what I'm going to share about today. It looks like this. Here's a group of 7 people. You can't see what they're looking at, but they're looking at some projected screens. The basic, I would say one of the basic guidelines, or maybe a prime directive we follow, is this driver navigator style, where there's somebody at the keyboard and they're considered the driver, and there's other people and they're considered the navigators. It's not 5 people watching one person work. It's 5 people programming with a smart input device, the driver, at the keyboard to put what is being programmed actually into the computer. So it's not at all a thing where people are just passively sitting and watching. They're interacting, talking, and working together through this whole process. There's a link down there to a 3-minute video that you can see of us working an entire day, but it's been condensed down through time lapse into just a 3-minute video. We use this prime directive or guideline from Llewellyn Falco. For an idea to go from someone's head into the computer, it must go through someone else's hands. This requires a very full form of communication, and it takes time to learn to do this. It's not something you just put 5 people in a room and say, hey, start working well together, and then expecting good things to happen. So I'm going to show you some photos, just a few, to quickly see that this is being done all over the world. This is the original location where we originated the idea in San Marcos, California. Here's a group in Alaska, a group in France, at least I think they're in France, a group in the UK, and again, I'm not sure, but I think they're in the UK, a group in Hungary. Here's GDS in London, that's Government Digital Services. Boston, a group that had at least 5 or 6 teams working together. Stockholm, this is a company that has, I think, 6 or 7 mob programming teams with work areas like this. This is Unruly in London. At the time I visited them, they had something like 6 teams mob programming. This is some classes they do at Harvard where they actually teach using a mob programming style. And another shot in London, a group in South Africa. Yeah, I got that spelt wrong. A group in Florida and Greece. So I'm showing you all these pictures mostly just so you can see the nature of it and to show you it's not just one crazy person, it's a whole bunch of crazy people all over the world. And here's some folks in Japan. I love this picture. They're actually sitting on mats on the floor to do their mob programming. Quite interesting. Alrighty, this is an example of a team working together. All the brilliant minds have been brought together, but they're not doing programming clearly. What we have here is NASA Mission Control, and what they're doing is working on the same mission. All the brilliant minds at the same time, same space, same thing, working all together. So Now we're on to the purpose of this talk today. Whenever I share mob programming, this question is almost always asked. How can we be productive with 5 people at one computer? And of course, here's a picture with 7 people. It's not the number of people exactly, it's how can we be productive with a bunch of people at one computer? Now, at first, when I was asked that question, the very first talk I gave back in 2012 on this, is my response was to say, I don't know, is that really important? Because to me, it's not important how it was working. I was just sharing that it was working for us. But people have always asking this question, so I feel I need to have some sort of an answer. But first of all, we were paying attention, and here's what we noticed. That was one thing we were specializing in, was paying attention to how things were going for us. We would do little experiments and see the results on a daily basis. And what we noticed is when you work separately, for example, 5 people here working separately, then you add up their work over time, let's say a week, we would get a certain amount done. But what we noticed is when we worked together, we were getting a whole lot more done. And the bonus to this wasn't that we were just getting more stuff done. We were working on the more important stuff because we were making better decisions about what to work on. We were also getting it better done. In other words, it was more complete when we were done. Rarely did we leave something out. Rarely did we forget something that was important to take care of. And lastly, we were getting better quality. Now, along with all this, we were also enjoying our day more. So now comes the question, to me, is how do we answer this question that they've been asking? And I think that it starts with this concept. A system is not the sum of the behavior of its parts. It's the product of their interactions. So if we can enhance the quality of the interactions, which is what I think Agile's all about, maybe we'll get better results. Maybe not, but it seems like we would. We actually kept records to see how much more we were getting done, and we found it was quite a bit more productive. But how do you prove that? I'm not sure I can. But I want to talk about productivity first. So this is an issue that I often see when people ask a question like, how can you be productive? I want to make sure we're using the right words. There are 3 different related words here I want to talk about: efficiency, productivity, and effectiveness. Now, it's puzzling to me that it's most common that I hear the word productive. So I'm going to talk about that just a little bit in a very condensed manner. To me, efficiency is we're doing things right. We're doing things in an efficient manner because we're less motion or less waste and so on. But doing things right is only beneficial if we're working on the right things. So efficiency isn't really the goal. Productivity is simply a way of saying, are we getting a certain amount done for a certain amount of input? So it's basically, productivity is about producing something. That means we have something at the end of this time, but are we working on the right thing? Again, effectiveness is about doing the right thing. So if we use these definitions, I'd much rather, or I'd be a lot more interested in effectiveness than efficiency or productivity, because efficiency leads to busy work. We can be very busy and yet not productive and not effective. If we're productive, we could be working on the wrong things. We're producing the wrong thing. So I really want to focus on working on the right things. So I want to change the question perhaps. So if the question is, how can we be productive with 5 people at one computer? I wanted a better question. Now, this is a picture of my dad when he was 4 or 5 years old. I miss him dearly, but he was a wonderful guy, and he was an engineer. So he often would give me guidance. He would say, when you get asked the wrong question, you need to rephrase the question. And there's several ways to do it, but we're not really interested in the answers. What we're interested in is finding a better question. And Peter Block puts it this way: transformation comes more from pursuing profound questions than seeking practical answers. I believe this is saying, let's focus on finding the good questions, not on answering the question we already have. Let's use the question we have to find a better question. And who better to turn to on this than Deming, who would say, if you don't know how to ask the right question, you can discover nothing. Well, I don't know if I'd go that far, but I have no reason to doubt him. I can kind of, I have a lot of faith in the things that Deming shared with us. So what do we do about this? So if first our question is slightly wrong, I want to correct it. Rather than saying, how can we be productive with 5 people at one computer? I want to replace this with, how can we be effective with 5 people at one computer? So that's a beginning point, but that's not the kind of question my dad's talking about. We want a better question. And so my dad would say, let's flip this over. He wants to ask the question from the opposite point of view. And this is, the purpose of this is so that we can get a better understanding about the kind of question that we've just asked. So if we're asking, how can we be effective with 5 people at one computer? If we flip this over, I want a kind of a reverse question to that. And the reverse question that I came up with is this one. How can we be effective if we separate the people who should be working together? So now we can take both of those questions and we can look at this. What if we separate the people who should be working together? Is that going to be productive, or I would say effective? So we move these people apart, we put barriers between them, and not just cubicle barriers, we move them to different rooms, move them to different floors, move them to different buildings. And in a lot of cases, as you probably are working, people are going to be maybe in different cities and different time zones. These separations are not necessarily adding to the effectiveness. They may be destroying the effectiveness. So this led to the better question that my dad would have had me seek if he was guiding me right now. And this was the question I came to. What are the things that destroy effectiveness? If we ask ourselves that, then we can judge whether one way of working is effective or not. If we know the things that will destroy productivity, we can ask, are those present in this way of working? Are they present in that way of working? So we usually do this as an exercise. Here in this webinar today, I won't do it, but I'll share the results of another team that did this exercise. This was a team of about 20 people that were working in 4 teams of 5 people each. And we did a 3-minute exercise. I asked them to write as many different things as they could think of on Post-it notes, of course, because we do Agile stuff, right? And so write those things down and we'll collect them up. 3-minute exercise from about 20 people, we came up with 50 unique things that can destroy effectiveness. To me, that was amazing. I won't read through all of these, but you can kind of take a quick look. Something like missing requirements, waiting for clarification, the time zone differences, doubt, distractions. Oh, here's a good pair, noise or too quiet. Context switching. I often hear multitasking, and on and on. So if we identify these things that are destroying productivity, now we can start looking at, could this be, or effectiveness, I want to use that word. Is this way of working more effective than that way based on the number of these problems that we are having to endure? So I bucketed these into these categories. There are other categories, but what we noticed with mob programming is that a lot of those problems had simply faded away for us. We did not set out to solve those problems. We set out to work well together. The side effect of working well together, or I should say the direct effect of working well together, is that a lot of those problems faded away. And when we were together as a team, we could see a lot more good happening and a lot less of the bad happening. And we didn't set out to actually do that. We were just trying to figure out how to work well together. So one of the many communication problems that I see is one that I discovered for myself when we were doing some research, so to speak, or at least looking into some communication problems at a company I was at. And I call this one the question queue time. I gave it this name, I don't know, now 15 years ago, but it seems to still work. It could also be called the question answer time, the question or the answer queue time, but I think question queue time has a better ring to it. So here's the question queue time. It's the amount of time that we must wait to get an answer to a question that's blocking us. We all get this in software development. It could be something like something that's not clear in a requirement, or in a discussion we had even a day earlier when we thought we had an understanding. As we're doing the work, we discover we don't. We have to go find the person with the information and get them to give us the answer. This amount of time that we wait is being in a queue, and waiting is considered one of the biggest problems, both in product and manufacturing, product development and manufacturing. So let's look at the question queue time for a moment. If we use a value stream map, where the green here on the top represents good things getting done, and the bottom is waiting for answers to questions that we can't quickly get the answer for, we can then measure how much of our day is wasted. And typically, it can be quite a bit. So I'm going to give a kind of an artificial example just to make it easy to describe. What if for every hour we worked, we get a blocking question? If we use the value stream map, we can quickly see if we have 0 time, then there's going to be no waste. If it takes us 2 minutes, we're going to waste 16 minutes a day, but even then it's a little bit of a disturbance in our day. What if it takes us 10 minutes? What if it takes us an hour to get the answer to that question? We're essentially wasting half the day. Well, what if we're waiting all day? This is not uncommon. I see full day to 2 or 3 day waiting periods between asking a question and getting an answer. This is blocking us. Now, there's a way to deal with this. How do we typically solve for it? We have the one task we're working on, and then we introduce another task to work on while we're waiting. This is called adding inventory. Inventory itself is a waste. So we think this is solving for a problem, but it's not. Basically, we're going to work on many tasks to keep us busy. If you look at this little diagram, you'll see now we're green all the time, and that feels good. But we're also hiding that we're red all the time, and that's a very bad thing. It's much worse to hide your problems than to expose them. So the symptom is we're not busy enough. We're waiting. But the real problem is we're not getting our questions answered quickly. So the problem has a symptom, and if we deal with the symptom, we're not perhaps working in the most meaningful way possible. So what do we do about this is hide the problem and deal with the symptom. But what we've done is we've introduced inventory. And inventory is work that we've started on, but is not yet delivering value. If we look around a factory floor, it's easy to spot inventory, like parts that are going to be assembled later, that are being molded on a plastic molding machine. You can see those parts accumulating, and that's considered inventory, and it's waste in the lean world. As soon as we manufacture that thing and put it out to customers and they're actually using it, we now have value. But what we've done is we've solved a queuing problem. Actually, we've dealt with a symptom of it, but we've introduced another problem. We now have 2 problems. We've multiplied our problems. So how did we solve for this? Well, we didn't. It just faded away for us when we all start working together, even working with our product owners. And I'll make this bold statement. Most of the waste that I see in waiting in software development is waiting on the product expert, product owner, or whatever to get an answer to a question we've asked them. Maybe they haven't even responded to our email yet. Maybe they have to go talk to someone else. I'll take an even bolder step. If they need to go talk to someone else to answer our question, then they might not be the ideal product owner, because the product owner should be able to answer questions immediately. So this, for us, gave us at most a 2-minute queue time when our product owners would work well with us. And usually they'd come and actually be on the team for the mob programming team, but they couldn't spend their whole day there. So let's see what happens. We end up with this automatic one-piece flow. And this was a clue, this was an important clue to me about how could this possibly be effective, 5 or 6 people at one computer. Interestingly, that word, flow, was what really stuck with me. And a good friend of mine who's helped a great deal in the mob programming effort to spread this around, she had told me that she'd asked me, did you notice that you're always only working on one thing? And of course we had, but that really amplified the thought to me. We have achieved an automatic one-piece flow, which is a good thing to have in the lean world, but we kind of did it by accident, just by simply working together. We're all focused on one thing at a time. So let's focus on this word flow. And for the rest of this presentation, this is the key, this flow. So at first, to me, I thought it was going to be something like flow versus flow. The idea of psychological flow and the idea of lean flow. These are 2 different uses of the same word. They're probably related in some ways, but I immediately could see psychological flow might be hampered by mob programming. And I'll explain what psychological flow is now. The thing is that we can get into a state where we are very productive or very effective, and it actually feels good to us, and it's called flow. This fellow here, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, He is a psychologist who has written quite a bit and researched quite a bit on this topic, and I think he coined the term. I'm going to read this to you. It just says, flow is a state in which a person is so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. This is something that programmers often get into. They're so focused on what they're doing that they disconnect from the things that are going on around them. Another way to say this is you're so involved in what you're doing, you don't see yourself as being separate from what you're doing. Now, I won't go into a lot of details about this. I'm just going to share a little bit of it. There's a list of 8 or 10 items here, but I'll pick a couple. The experience itself is intrinsically rewarding. The clarity of the goals and the reward are always in our mind. We get this feeling of control over the task and we lose awareness of time. There's certain effortless and ease to our work and so on. So these are the elements of flow. And when we're alone, we're focused on our work, we don't want to be disturbed, because anything that disturbs this flow for us, it might take a long time to get back into it. So I'm not going to go too much further into this, but I'm sure you understand what flow is or heard about it. It's sometimes also called the zone. There's this focus that once it becomes intense, we get this sense of ecstasy and clarity. And I think some people experience that in programming, and I'd say maybe almost everybody does at one time or another. Some people work almost in a constant state of flow as long as they're not interrupted. You know what you want to do from moment to moment? The sense of time disappears. These are the things we've been talking about. So we can call it flow or being in the zone. The thing is, I immediately recognized that mob programming might destroy that for us. It will get us distracted out of our flow. But I learned differently, I think, as I went along through this. First of all, we can ask this question, can we get flow in a crowd? And actually, turns out, at least from my reading and research, you can. Here's just a few simple examples. Here's some people working, I think this is probably about the year I was born, but working all together. They're focused together on either a problem or a task that they're doing. This is a real good example of a kind of flow that happens that you can easily see with musical groups or with orchestras or with acting troupes, or our common ideas about how a productive, let's say, comedy writing troupe works, or things like that. Also, I like to share this because it's very closely related to software development. This is, I believe, this is a picture of the Xerox PARC. So I would say this flow idea of a team is also something we can take advantage of. So if we can take advantage of it, what is this about? Well, I found this study that's done by this fellow, Jeff Vandenhout, and he's written a paper. You can actually get this, I believe, as a PDF online. I found it that way. And I'm not going to go into details here either, but this is what started me thinking about, can we get flow with a team? And apparently, according to these studies, you can. You can see we talk about collective ambition, common goal, aligned personal goals, high skill integration. So where a person can have a certain amount of skill that keeps them in a personal flow, a team brings skills together. So we have a bigger gathering of skills that we can get this, I think, a strong kind of a flow out of it. We have the open communication between each other, but we do it safely. So we have this concept of safety. There's this mutual commitment, sense of unity, this idea that we are all together in this sense of joint progress. When we have a success, we're sharing in the success. A mutual trust which grows through doing this, and a holistic focus. So if this is really true, that we can get team flow, can we also couple both team flow and individual flow? And what we found was, by the way we worked with mob programming, it was entirely possible, because each team member is allowed to control their own thinking and their own time. If they want to go off and think alone, they can go do it. If they feel they need to take a walk or go down to the gym, at the company we have a gym, they can go do some exercise for a while. They can go and do the things that help spark their thinking and bring it back to the team. So you can take it, you can even step away mentally from the team while you're sitting with them. Say, hey, everybody, I'm going to think about this for a moment. And you might focus separately from the team. We try to always keep our team focused together, but when it's to our advantage to separate, we do. So there's this study from Google called the Project Aristotle, where they wanted to understand better, why are some teams better than other teams? And in a nutshell, I think it comes down to at least these two things. There's a psychological safety within the team that everybody there feels free to share their ideas, and they won't be ridiculed or pushed down for that. Or there's lots of ways to say it. You know, a lot of times we ignore somebody else's ideas in favor of someone else's. We need to consider these things. If you have a team that considers psychological safety and provides it, then we can get a much better working team. And then there's this idea of equal voice. And I don't really think equal voice means everybody speaks the same amount. It's just that we value each person's voice equally. We don't turn away somebody's idea. And I think this psychological safety is an important part of that. One other thing, this is all good. And I think this is all very powerful. But we have to consider this other kind of flow, which is lean flow. So if team flow and individual flow can exist together, or at least we can take advantage of them, how does this work in with lean flow? And at this point, by the time I got to this point in my research, or I should say my study of other people's research, it was all starting to gel for me. Basically what flow is in manufacturing, in a very simplified form, is the complete production of something, of one thing, from start to finish, with as little waste as possible. And we can say waste here is work in process, which is inventory, and as little waiting between operations as possible. In the old way of thinking, having lots of parts available to be put together would be considered efficient, but efficiency isn't really that much of a benefit to us. This allows us to focus on one thing at a time and bring all of our best to that one thing. To think about this in product development, which is different than manufacturing, I think that software development is like product development. This work by Donald Ryerson really focuses nicely on this. The idea of flow for product development is very much the same, and we can use the value stream map to determine what is waste and what is producing value. If we start understanding the activities that we're doing that are providing value, which I think I would call getting the right things done, working on the right things, and that includes exploration and experimenting and discovery. That's part of software development, versus the things that are destroying productivity. And you saw all those earlier, or destroying effectiveness. These things are troubling to me, and just a few examples. The biggest one is waiting. We'll talk about, that's queuing. We'll talk about that in a minute. But merging our work. So when we work separately, our ideas are diverging. And at some point, we bring them back together. And that merging can mean we've done quite a bit of work using 2 different ideas or more. If there's 5 of us, we might have 5 different ideas about the right way to proceed. And when we gather our work back together, we have to figure out how we're going to merge these things together, not just the work itself, but merge our ideas. We ask each other questions. Why would you do it the way you did it? We often have forgotten by that time all the decisions we made to get to where we are. We were just simply trying to solve the problem. Now we have to figure out and maybe explain to each other why we chose to do this over that, and we have to align ourselves again. Arguing and discussing rather than doing something is a big area of waste. I see this in software development all the time. People will argue about which way to do something is better when they can easily prove it in just 5 or 10 minutes of actually writing some code or doing the actual work. Discussing rather than doing is a little different than arguing, but it's based on the same thing. As long as we're discussing, we're not proving anything. We can try and convince each other that our ideas are better, but when we just go ahead and try them, we find out rather quickly. And usually, if we try 2 different ideas, we end up with a 3rd, even better idea. It's in the doing of the work that we discover the work that we must do. That's what exposes reality. So often we're also doing work that doesn't need to be done, very wasteful. Doing the wrong thing, rather than the thing that our customers want. We're working on something we don't yet know that they want. And the last one is failure demand. Failure demand is when we've done something that generates the need to redo it. So if in software development, an easy one to see is when we write bugs into our code. We deliver buggy code. Now we have to rework that code, completely destroys our effectiveness. So this is my definition of flow within software development. Each story flows from idea to delivered working software directly, without waiting, distraction, interruption, or multitasking. We can't multitask. That's been proven. But the waiting, the distraction, and the interruption That's something of part of our daily work. When a manager comes into a programmer and taps them on the shoulder and asks them something like, can I interrupt you for a moment? The programmer really, they already feel that they've just been interrupted. They have no way to keep their train of thought. That interruption was sufficient. So on and so on. So we won't talk too much more about that, but this is the concept. We want to go directly to something somebody can use without the wastes. So with mob programming, we're optimizing for the flow of the work rather than for the output of the individual. This is sort of the story of the tortoise and the hare, right? So the flow of the race worked well for the tortoise because he didn't have the interruptions. So if we really are looking for, I think, optimizing for the flow of the work, we are not going to be optimizing for the speed of the individual or the amount of work being done by the individual. I like to put it this way. We're not trying to get the most work out of each person. What we're trying to do is to get the best out of each person into everything we do. This is where the quality gains come from. This is where the better usability comes from. We're getting the best of each individual into everything we do. And I think mob programming just naturally gave that to us. So we're getting close to ending this now. And what I want to share is this principle of queuing waste that comes from Reinertsen. And I'm going to share a story I just learned the other day as well. Queues are the root cause of the majority of economic waste in product development. Now, if that's the root cause of the majority, then if we were to at least improve that slightly, things would get better. We got rid of all the queues best we could accidentally by doing mob programming, because the majority of the queues we had were the question queue time, when we're waiting to get an answer from somebody who isn't in the room. So how much waste is that? Now I was talking to someone, I don't think I'm free to explain where or who this was, but it's a prominent person that that's done quite a bit of work in the lean field and agile. And they've done some studies on lean waste, and they said, he said his studies had showed that 98% of our time is wasted in waiting in product development. That's a huge amount. And then today I was talking to somebody, they told me that it's the number that they had heard was 5% of our time is effective work, and the rest of it is wasted in waiting. Now, if that's really true, and I'm afraid that it probably is, then we hit upon accidentally a way to eliminate that waste. So I think I can now answer that original question. How can we be effective with 5 people at one computer? Well, it's because we have this flow plus flow. The psychological flow, both individual and team, coupled with the lean flow of one-piece flow. We're working from beginning to end without interruption. And of course, we can take lunch breaks, don't get me wrong. The idea is we're not interrupted by other work or other distractions. Then we get these benefits that we've seen with mob programming. We've enabled flow by eliminating the queues. We've enabled individual flow by allowing each person to be in control of their own thinking. Nobody's going to interrupt them. If they don't want to be interrupted, they go and think alone. We've enabled team flow by learning to work well together. And as you do that, the more you do it, the better you become at having that flow. Of course, you always have to be paying attention to making it easy for everybody to work and making all of our interactions fruitful rather than blocked by personality problems and conflicts. We need to learn to do that. None of this comes easy. So I think we're rounding this up. You'll notice again this earlier slide just to show that these problems faded away for us, not on purpose. We didn't purposefully set out to do this, but we noticed they faded away for us. So we could answer that question, how can we possibly be effective? It's because of these things. So I think we can open up the floor to questions if we want to do that. Would this be a good time for that?
That would be a good time. And people are asking if this is recorded. Yes, I think they're also trying to probably find better questions because you challenge them right now to bring better questions. No, that's a good thing.
Well, so but any question is the starting point to finding a better question. And some questions are really good to just answer. But it doesn't matter where you start with the question as long as we realize we usually are going to find a better question along the way. So don't feel too embarrassed to ask a question.
Okay. And if you can change the Lean Agile to say Toronto, it would be good. Here we have a question. Has this been applied outside of programming?
So mob programming is, so you saw the pictures of the Beatles and other teams. I think we have a unique situation in software development, and that is that we think we need to work alone. But in many other endeavors, I saw a picture the other day of an operating theater where a doctor was doing a surgery, and there were 5 or 6 people working with that doctor: a nurse, a surgical technician, an anesthesiologist, and some other person, maybe a second surgeon. I don't know. But we see teamwork of this type in many, many other endeavors. And I think that what we've done with ourselves in software development is we've thought that by dividing the work up and having individuals work on different pieces, that would be more efficient. But we kind of caused our own problem. Whereas it's not obvious that if we bring these people together, then they would be more effective. So we need to ask that question. So that would be the thing, is why in software development is it different than these other fields? Now there is somebody doing talks about mob testing.
Yes.
And
Lisa?
yes, and there's quite a few people now doing that. It kind of kicked off, I think, with Marit in Finland. Because she had invited me to go give a talk at Agile Tampere back in 2014, and they really picked up on the idea. And then also there are people doing mob marketing. There's a group from, I think they're from a printing house called Vistaprint, a big worldwide company. They gather together all the people they need to make their marketing materials: a copywriter, an expert at maybe Adobe tools like Illustrator and Photoshop, an expert at the marketing program itself, an expert on maybe the data that they collect, that they use for this, and they all work together to do that at one time. So I think it's being done in many other things. The difference here is that we gather together to do the work rather than gather together to talk about the work, divvy it up, make some assignments, and then everybody goes off to do the work. So it's a different thing than just a meeting, because meetings are typically about moving from the idea to deciding who will do the work, but then the work is done individually. So yes, I think it can be done in many other fields. Okay.
We have quite a few questions, so probably let's try to get to some of them, majority. Yeah. So there is, I'm going to combine two, is a question around the logic behind 7-minute rotation and what happens when a person is in the zone, but the time is up.
Well, now, the person at the keyboard, let's be clear, the person at the keyboard is like a smart input device. It's not them being in the zone, it's the team being in the zone. When you take the keyboard, it's not that you are now just a conduit for the team. That's not where the real work is. The programming is thinking work, not coding work. So the 7-minute timer, actually, I would recommend maybe a 4-minute timer, but most people want a longer time. I like to work with a 4 or 5-minute timer. We were using a 7 to 10-minute timer at the time I put this slides together at Hunter. But yeah, the zone is a team level thing. We're sharing the cognitive load. The person at the keyboard is simply line by line following the instructions, so to speak. So we're not programming out loud. It could be like this. Well, let's see, we're going to collect, we're going to need to review somebody's payment history. So we'll probably need a query to get some information about their payment history. And that we can start coding on. So we say, oh, I know how to do that, query that we'll need. And they will become a vocal or designated navigator who will navigate the driver through doing that query. And they say, well, we need to gather data from these 2 tables. We're going to join on that field, and so on. So we're not expressing the code out loud, we're expressing the idea, and the person at the keyboard. So I'd like to think of it this way. We use a keyboard to communicate with the computer only because there aren't really many better ways. But when we introduce a driver, the person at the keyboard, they become a smart input device. So if we think of them more as being part of the computer than being part of the team for the few minutes they're at the keyboard, that's what I want us to envision conceptually. That's what I'm talking about. So the person at the keyboard would never be in the zone in the way that we're talking about. That's for the team itself to be in that zone. And if the individual wants to go try some things, they could go individually, go to a keyboard and try it, working alone. But we wouldn't, that would turn into a blocking situation for the team. We want the flow of the work. And so it's a different, very different workflow than somebody at the keyboard and everybody else is just watching them type. That's not what mob programming is. I hope that was clear.
Okay. I'm going to combine 3 questions that are around the same. They're all looking at the same thing, but probably asking differently. One is, tell us about the memberships or the roles of the people on the team, because we assume they are not all programmers. The other one is about how to enhance your programming skills without being the one taking control of the keyboard.
The value of working this way is that each of these roles are bringing their expertise to the work at the same time. So I want to imagine that we have the tester's viewpoint and the product owner's viewpoint and the database expert's viewpoint when we're actually writing code. In other words, we aren't, when we're writing the code, we're hoping, matter of fact, what we saw for ourselves was that if we split up the work amongst 4 or 5 people and they work on it over, say, a sprint or whatever iteration you might do, it may take 2 weeks to get this story done, and there's going to be a lot of coordination for communication that needs to be done. When we start working with the mob programming, this work was now getting done in 2 or 3 hours. Stories were getting done very quickly because there was no waiting. So if the testing person could be inputting information as we're creating this thing, and the developers can be inputting information, or that's me to say, adding their point of view while we're testing this thing, then we get to a result much, much quicker. So we're doing everybody's work all together. So at first we might talk about, what does this thing have to do? The product owner definitely has to be there for that, and hopefully they'll stay there for the whole story. Then the tester might say, well, how are we going to test for that? We're going to need to have a way to do this or a way to prove that. And the database person is going to be saying, yeah, and we're going to need to make a new connection between these 2 tables it doesn't yet have. We need to figure out how we're going to do that. So we're getting all these different points of view. Now, this is why I share this story about how this is about optimizing for the flow of the work, not for the output of the individual. We think as managers often that we need to keep the tester busy testing and the database person busy doing database work and the product owner busy thinking about just the product. But then we're interfering with the flow of the work, and we get, I would consider, we lose the advantage. We're optimizing for busy work rather than for effectiveness. So I know that might not seem like, how could that possibly be? And that's the purpose of this talk. This is why I think this can be. This is about flow, not about those individuals. So if I'm writing some code at the moment, there's still other things for the database person or the tester to be thinking about while we're creating this code. But code that gets created in just 2 or 3 hours has to be fully tested by the time that 2 or 3 hours is done, so it can be deployed at the end of that 2 or 3 hour period. So that means everybody's got to be working in concert all together at the same time. I know this is a bit of a stretch to try and understand, but this is why I think it's become so effective for us. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, as they say. And for us, we noticed this in the first day. Things were just getting done better and quicker. So, yeah, there's a lot. I say in some ways you got to give it a try, and you have to get good at it to actually get these benefits. But it's well worth considering. Okay, so I'm going to try and frame the question and tell me, because I'm not understanding. How do we convince executives that this is a good thing? Okay, so let's talk about executives. If executives are looking for anything other than, is this team performing well in delivering, then they're probably looking at the wrong metrics. There's a lot of thinking going on about this. And I would say an executive who doesn't understand how valuable teamwork is and we need to convince them, we've probably gotten ourselves into a dysfunctional situation. If anybody understands how valuable teamwork is, it should be the executives, the people who are counting on this company to, or these people to deliver well. So if we need data, then I would suggest the data about lead time, the amount of time it's been taking us to deliver something is probably the first thing to look at. So in a typical sprint, if we have, let's say, a team working on 5 or 6 stories, and they usually deliver the 5 or 6 stories at the end of the sprint, that's their measurement. Is that a useful measurement? It is to some degree, but with mob programming, we could pay attention to how frequently are we delivering now instead of every 2 weeks? Are we learning to deliver daily? Are we learning to deliver several times daily? So I would say it's an important thing to realize that most of the metrics that we're currently using are not actually helping us make good decisions. What we need is to, I think this might be a Russell Acuff quote, that when managers can't measure the things that matter, the things that they can measure becomes what matters. And that's backwards. So that's something I'm watching out for. So I don't have a way to really provide any metrics beyond, what is our cycle time? And are we measuring how much we're delivering on a weekly or daily basis? So I saw another message come in here, so I'm going to read the question. The question is, how to select teams, how to work with distributed teams. Well, now, there are a lot of people working in a distributed manner doing mob programming. A good example is Corgi Bytes out of Richmond. They happen to be here at the conference that we're having here in just a couple days, mob programming conference. They've been doing this for several years. They work in a distributed manner. The main problem with working distributed is the time zone differences. But you can easily set up a webinar style work environment, so it can be done in a distributed way. Everybody's image shows up on the screen, and or some teams I've seen, they actually have large monitors around the room with each person's face on each monitor, so we can see each other as if we're working together. I don't think that it's necessarily better or worse to work distributed. It's a different experience. But I've worked this way 2 different times for extended periods. Mob programming, I'd say over mob programming across time zones and so on, and it definitely can be done. The main thing is finding time to do it. So if you're spread apart 5 or 6 time zones, then you have to find some core hours that you can do it. The other question here is how to select teams. And I would say teams should be self-selecting. So the heuristic we use is who's interested in working on this thing is a good starting point. And you just need to have the right people that you will gather together based on the work itself. So the team itself, once they start working, will notice if they're getting questions coming up that they can't answer themselves. And that just indicates there's somebody else we need on this team. So if everybody's together in the same room and we don't get any unanswered questions, we can work directly through our work. And then each individual can decide for themselves, am I providing value here, or would I be better somewhere else? So I've always seen it a big problem that managers want to put together teams, and I think teams can figure out how to draw themselves together. So that may be a little bit advanced. Often when I've been in companies, we don't get to choose who's on the teams. And some people will bargain across teams to get people and so on. This is a bigger question. So I would say the key heuristic is we want a team put together, working together, where we don't get any blocking questions. And let those teams figure out if they've got redundancy or whatever, and give them the freedom to decide how that'll work. There probably are other questions, and I'd be happy to answer if there are, but I know we're running low on time.
Thank you very much, Woody. That was great, and thank you for all the people that that participated today. Feel free to send feedback to the Toronto Agile community on this webinar and suggesting other topics for us to have in webinars later on in the year. The our contact information is on the screen there now. And just a reminder that registration is open for open space. Eddie, you're gonna have to jump in with the date though, because I'm not sure what that is. When is
April 21st.
April 21st.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Woody. That was very entertaining and a lot of learning and both together.
Well, I hope everybody enjoyed it. I really enjoy sharing this stuff.